the Republican Party. It's also news worth keeping in mind, given that just last night we heard Donald Trump's new running mate, the person who's there because Mike Pence wouldn't or couldn't be there, J.D. Vance, his big gaffe of the night, his stumble of the night, was his inability or refusal or lack of a permission structure, if you will, to say that the reason Joe Biden lives at the White House is because he won and Donald Trump lost in 2020. It's where we start the hour with our friends who are still here, and we didn't let them leave. Also joining us, former lead investigator for the January 6th Select Committee, Tim Hafey's here, national investigative reporter for the Washington Post, Carol Leonnig is here. Lisa and John are still with us. Carol Leonnig, I start with you. We've been trying to separate out what is new to us, and that is Pence's testimony under oath before Jack Smith's investigators. But to Sarah Longwell's admonition, the very fact of this being in front of us as new information about one of the darkest days in our country's history is also a story 34 days out from a political election.
Absolutely. Unbelievable bombshell, as you described it earlier. It's really striking what Jack Smith has done here, because I lost your voice.
No, go ahead. We're just listening. You got us?
Oh, okay. So sorry. Yeah, I lost you for a minute. It's a really striking, thanks, Nicolle, because even though the purpose of this brief is a narrow legal one, which is to show Judge Chutkan and the appeals court above it and the Supreme Court above it the parts of the evidence that he has that are still usable, essentially, to prosecute and indict and convict Donald Trump, there are new facts here that are even surprising to me. I felt like I knew everything that happened in the days leading up to January 6th, and Pence's own safety issues that Donald Trump made worse on that day. But I didn't know, for example, that he turned to an aide upon hearing that Mike Pence was at the Capitol and in danger and had just been whisked to a secure location, a basement of the Capitol. I didn't know that Donald Trump had turned to the aide and said, "So what?" I also didn't know, by the way, that in a private lunch, Pence had said to Trump after he lost, and sometime in mid-November, Pence had said to Donald Trump, you know, you maybe should just give it up. I'm paraphrasing here, and try to run again in 2024. And Trump said, nah, I don't know. 2024 seems like a long way away. Another really striking thing here, Nicolle, that isn't related to Mike Pence is that Jack Smith has uncovered how Donald Trump basically sidelined all the campaign attorneys, or many of them, who said to him point blank, we're not going to win in this election fraud claim that you're making. We haven't won any of these claims. It's not going to work. And that is when Donald Trump decided to announce that he was choosing some additional campaign leadership in the form of Rudy Giuliani, Victoria Tenzing, her husband, Joe DeGeneva, and others who were telling him what he wanted to hear, which is that he could stay in power even though he had lost the election.
Let me also read part of the filing, Carol Leonnig, that gives us new granularity to our understanding of the timeline. Because I think that the fake electors plot, because it happened out in the States and a lot of the actors were outside of the White House, was almost covered in a separate silo from the West Wing conduct, which we're learning increasingly was directed by Donald Trump, with, as you said, people like John Eastman replacing the more normie actors like campaign staff and White House counsel. Let me read from page 59 about where those sort of lines of our reporting and the January 6th congressional investigation suggested they intersect, but where Jack Smith really nails that down. Quote, as late as early January, the conspirators attempted to keep the full nature of the fraudulent elector plan secret. On January 3rd, for instance, in a private text message exchange, CC6 wrote to CC5, quote, careful with your texts on the text groups. No reason to text things about the electors to anyone but CC2 and me. CC, which I think is short for co-conspirator 5, responded, K, known even by my 12-year-old as slang for okay. And co-conspirator 6 followed up, quote, "I'm probably a bit paranoid. Ha ha." Co-conspirator 5 wrote, quote, "A valuable trait." The callousness with which they knowingly cover their tracks for conduct that they know, if scrutinized, could implicate them in crimes is stunning, Carol.
It's also super helpful to Jack Smith, right? He is showing through their own words that these people had a state of mind, an awareness that this wasn't kosher to share widely. And my fellow guest, Tim Hafey, knows all about state of mind, and I'm sure we'll riff on this. It is also sort of amazing, too, because there were so many people that knew this elector plan. I believe the Congressional Committee had some testimony from the chair of the Republican Party for the United States saying that she was aware this was driven by Donald Trump. She was aware that there was this effort to have these alternate electors in place to help challenge the election down the road. If it turned out that in swing states there was some chaos or some confusion about who had won. And as we know, Donald Trump was sowing that confusion. Another really important thing here, Nicolle, is how crisply Jack Smith distinguishes when Donald Trump is acting as a candidate. You know, he emphasizes over and over again, this action was taken as a candidate seeking re-election. This action was taken as a candidate visiting Dalton, Georgia, and spreading lies about the election being stolen on January 4th. This call that he makes is as a candidate. Again, distinguishing from that no-go zone that the Supreme Court has established where Donald Trump's actions as a president are immune.
Carol, let me ask you one last question about your body of reporting and your sort of intimate understanding of what national security types thought of the Trump years and Trump personally, the character of the man, the kinds of things that General Stanley McChrystal wrote in an op-ed and said in an interview led him to endorse Vice President Kamala Harris for president. It certainly deepens the portrait of alarm that your reporting helped us understand was a dynamic and changing and increasing element of the entire Trump presidency. But I wonder if you think this absolute indifference, this depraved indifference to the safety of the Vice President of the United States, a constitutional figure, right? Not some figurehead, not in Trump's view, someone whose life should have been disposable, but someone with constitutional responsibilities to the continuity of government, who in the middle of a deadly insurrection, Donald Trump and people around him are speaking with such callous indifference to whether he lives or dies. So what? What are you hearing from those folks as this information, this new information, seeps into the public understanding?
What I've been hearing from those folks as the countdown comes to the election is, tell me something I don't know. They lived it, Nicolle, in the National Security Council or in the intelligence agencies, in the firmament of the National Security Council. They heard Donald Trump say and do things that were not in the interest of protecting our country. And let's not forget, they remember keenly, as does Jack Smith, Donald Trump deciding willy-nilly that he was going to take back to his private home as he left the White House on January 20th without stopping for the inauguration of his successor, hundreds of classified documents, some of which that were so secretive and involved the national defense information we have about other countries, adversaries and allies. Some of it that was so secretive that there were only a handful of people that were authorized by the president or a cabinet secretary to even know this information existed. So there's a wall of answers to your question from a wall of people who saw Donald Trump behave callously towards national security and his treatment of Mike Pence on that day, both in his response, so what, or as we reported at the time, his response of, well, maybe Mike Pence deserves it, when someone alerted him that his supporters were chanting for Mike Pence to be hung. That is not a surprise to that group.
Well, I guess like my final question would be then what explains the wall of silence from folks like Gina Haspel and Mark Milley and Jim Mattis and John Kelly, if this is a so what to them?
Again, not disclosing sources or individual names, right? I don't think that CIA officials are generally in the news on a regular basis, but I have seen Mark Milley and John Kelly say quite a few things on this score, and to you included.
Carol Leonnig, thank you so much for not just getting through this breaking news story with us, but as always, more importantly, putting it into context, in the national security context especially. We're grateful to you always. Tim Hafey, let me bring you in. As someone who knows this story perhaps better than anyone on the planet, what is your reaction to the testimony that Jack Smith obtained from Mike Pence?
Nicolle, I see it as more meat on the bones of the story that the committee told a couple of years ago. There's no significant new fact, but there's significant new detail that reinforces the bones of the story that we told. This was an intentional, multi-part plan fueled by deception, orchestrated by the former president to prevent the transfer of power. That's what the committee said. That's what this pleading puts together. Again, more details. I'm struck by the Pence stuff. I mean, we obviously did not get the direct testimony of the vice president, but his accounts in this pleading of direct communications with the president, the repeated times where he told for the former president that he did not have the authority to do what the president was asking him to do on January 6th. Despite that consistent approach, the president launching the mob against him, it is shocking. You know, we knew that circumstantially from our investigation, but Pence, in his direct account of that, is really, really striking. And then the other new stuff that I don't think we were successful in getting was the voices, the consistent voices telling the president that he lost, including Eric Hirschman. You know, we interviewed Hirschman, but he emerges in this pleading as being much more directly involved in that sort of team normal group that's telling the former president, hey, there's no path forward. There's no way for you to win. It's time for you to stop. The chorus of responsible people very, very close to the president, Hirschman and the former president go back years and years, well before President Trump was in politics. Those voices and the credibility and consistency of them emerges as well. So no bombshell new fact, Nicolle, but some really important, significant evidence that supports the underlying narrative that the committee told, and that I think hopefully a jury will hear at some point in the future.
Tim, one of the things that feels new to me is the granularity in the timeline and the way you can now drop the Pence-Trump conversations and meetings. Some of them are calls, some of them were meetings, onto the timeline of what Trump was tweeting and what Trump was saying in other meetings that we heard about from other bombshell witnesses, people like Cassidy Hutchinson. What is your sense of how this deepens our understanding of how long Trump was planning on knowingly claiming that he'd won when he knew for weeks and weeks and weeks that he'd lost?
Yeah, it is clearly a brief that contemplates the crucial issue in the case, which is the necessity of demonstrating the president's intent, right? The fact that he intended to disrupt an official proceeding, the fact that he was mindful of